I found my wife sitting on the freezing porch, shivering in an old wooden chair, wearing only a thin blouse, while my mother-in-law and my own family laughed loudly by the fireplace. The thermometer read 0 degrees on that Christmas Eve in Denver, and Rachel was out there, abandoned like an animal, while I listened to the laughter coming from the living room. "Thomas, you're back too early," said my mother Helen, opening the door with a forced smile, holding a glass of red wine. "We weren't expecting you before 9 o'clock. I took off my heavy coat and wrapped it around Rachel immediately, feeling his cold, shivering body against my chest. His lips were purple, his hands numb, and she could barely speak. "My name is Thomas Mitchell, I'm 35 years old, and I just found out that my own family was torturing my wife while I was away on business. Over the past 6 months, Rachel had suffered 4 miscarriages. Each loss broke his heart a little more, and I thought that staying with my family during my business trips would help him recover. How wrong I was. I carried Rachel into the house, his wet shoes leaving tracks on the expensive carpet in the entryway. In the living room, I found my brother Kevin sitting comfortably on the leather sofa, his sister-in-law Linda serving cheese and crackers, and my parents toasting each other by the crackling fire. Why was Rachel on the porch in the cold? I asked, my voice controlled but tense. My mother shrugged, as if it were obvious. She said she needed some fresh air. Who are we to stop her? Fresh air? It's 0 degrees outside. Kevin laughed, adjusting his expensive tie. Thomas, his wife has some strange ideas. She said she was hot and wanted to go outside. It's not our fault that she doesn't know how to dress properly. I looked at Rachel in my arms. She was clearly in shock, shaking uncontrollably, and her breathing was irregular. Any normal person would have brought her inside immediately. Besides, Linda continued, biting into a cookie, she wasn't contributing much to the dinner preparations anyway. She stayed in her room the whole time, crying. What kind of wife doesn't help in the kitchen on Christmas? I felt my jaw clench. Rachel had been an incredible chef before the miscarriages. The depression that followed the losses obviously affected her energy, but that didn't justify abandoning her in the cold. She's going through a difficult time, I said, trying to remain calm. Difficult time? My mother let out a bitter laugh. Thomas, dear, all women go through losses. That's no excuse for being lazy and dramatic. I carried Rachel to the guest room upstairs, closing the door behind us. I turned the heater up to maximum and tucked her under several blankets, massaging her hands and feet to restore circulation. Thomas, she whispered, her voice weak, he said I was faking being sick. That I was a dead weight on the family. My heart sank. What else did they say? His mother said that women who can't have children shouldn't expect to be treated like queens. Kevin laughed and agreed. Tears streamed down my face. I had entrusted my wife to my family, thinking they would take care of her during my longest absence of the year. Instead, he had psychologically tortured her. I went downstairs to find everyone still in the living room, now serving dessert and chatting cheerfully as if nothing had happened. We need to talk, I announced. Sure, son, said my father Harold, raising her glass. Would you like some wine? We have that Cabernet you like. I don't want wine. I want explanations as to why you let my wife freeze on the porch. The mood changed instantly. The laughter stopped. Kevin sat up straight, Linda stopped chewing, my parents exchanged glances. Thomas, you're being dramatic, Helen said. Rachel is an adult. If she chose to sit outside, that was her choice. Chose. I exploded. She was in hypothermic shock. Hypothermic shock. Kevin laughed. For God's sake, Thomas, she was outside for 20 minutes at most. But I knew that was a lie. Rachel's condition suggested prolonged exposure to the cold. His lips wouldn't have turned so purple, her hands wouldn't have gone so numb in just 20 minutes. I went back upstairs to check on Rachel. She had fallen asleep, finally warm, but she was muttering fragmented words in her sleep. Words like useless, failure, dead weight. The same words her family had used. At that moment, watching my wife sleep after being traumatized by the people I loved most in the world, I made a decision that would change everything. They didn't know it, but I had recorded our conversation on my phone when I first went downstairs. Every cruel word, every sadistic laugh, every pathetic excuse was documented. And if it is his pleasure to enjoy this story of how I discovered my family's true colors, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the days that followed was a lesson they will never forget. Because while they slept peacefully that night, thinking they had gotten away with another night of psychological torture, I was awake, planning something that would change our lives forever. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and went downstairs to find my mother, Helen, making coffee in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. He was wearing his pink silk robe, her hair perfectly styled even at 6 in the morning, a fake smile plastered on her face when she saw me. "Good morning, dear," she said, her voice too sweet to be genuine. "How did Rachel spend the night? I hope she has recovered from her little dramatic crisis." Little dramatic crisis. The words came out of her mouth as if Rachel had faked a cold to get attention. "Mom, she was hypothermic. She could have died." Helen laughed, stirring sugar into her imported porcelain cup. "Thomas, you've always been too protective of women. Remember when you were in college and defended those little girls who pretended to be drunk just to get a ride home?" I didn't remember any such situation, but Helen always invented memories that justified her cruel opinions. "Besides," she continued, "Rachel needs to learn to be more resilient. The women in our family have always been strong. His grandmother raised 4 children during the Great Depression without complaining once." I went upstairs to check on Rachel. She was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands as if they were contaminated. "Thomas," she whispered, "her mother told me yesterday that women who lose babies are cursed. That God punishes them because they are not worthy of being mothers." My blood ran cold. Helen had grown up in an extremist religious family, but I never imagined she would use her faith as a weapon against my vulnerable wife. "She said he's a burden to you. That you should consider committing him to a psychiatric clinic so he doesn't continue to embarrass the Mitchell family." I clenched my fists. Every word she repeated was like a bullet to my chest. For the past 6 months, while I traveled for work as a technology consultant, I had entrusted my wife to the care of my family. Rachel was too fragile to be alone after her consecutive miscarriages, so I thought the family environment would help her heal. How wrong I was. I went back downstairs and found the whole family gathered for breakfast. Kevin was already dressed in his expensive suit, reading the news on his tablet, while Linda got the kids ready for school. "We need to talk about Rachel," I announced, pouring myself some coffee. "What is there to talk about?" asked my father, Harold, without looking up from the newspaper. "Her instability is evident. Just yesterday, she started crying out of nowhere when Linda mentioned the new playground near the school." Linda laughed, adjusting the bow in her 5-year-old daughter's hair. "It was hilarious, actually. I mentioned that the kids love the new toys, and Rachel just broke down. As if the world had ended. She's lost 4 babies, she said through clenched teeth. It's obvious that mentioning children affects her." "Thomas," Helen approached, placing her hand condescendingly on my shoulder, "you need to stop making Rachel out to be a victim. Thousands of women lose pregnancies and move on. She's using it as an excuse to be lazy and dramatic." "Exactly," Kevin agreed, finally looking up. "Do you know how many times Linda had morning sickness during her pregnancies? But she never stopped taking care of the house, cooking, being a proper wife." Linda nodded proudly. "A real woman overcomes difficulties, Thomas. She doesn't sit around feeling sorry for herself all the time." I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. "Rachel is depressed. It's a real medical condition." "Depression is a luxury for those who have no real responsibilities," said Harold, folding the newspaper forcefully. "In my day, a woman gave birth to a dozen children, lost a few along the way, and kept working. She didn't lie in bed feeling sorry for herself." "Dad." "Don't interrupt me," he continued, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when she wanted to end discussions. "Rachel has been living in our house for 6 months. She eats our food, uses our electricity, sleeps in our clean sheets. And what does she do in return? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Helen nodded vigorously. "Yesterday I asked her to help me prepare Christmas dinner. You know what she did? She said she couldn't be near the oven because the smell reminded her of when she cooked for the babies she lost." The whole table laughed. Even Linda's children laughed, imitating the adults without understanding the context. "It's ridiculous," said Linda. "She never even cooked for real babies. They were just imaginary hopes." Imaginary hopes. Rachel had spent hours researching healthy recipes for pregnant women, buying organic ingredients, planning nutritious meals that would help our children grow strong. And now that was reduced to imaginary hopes. Besides, Helen continued, Rachel is negatively affecting the children. My granddaughter asked why sad auntie always cries. How do we explain to a 5-year-old that some adults choose to be unhappy? Kevin laughed out loud. Remember when she saw the stroller in the garage and started sobbing? Linda had to take the kids to the park because Rachel was scaring them. The stroller. Rachel had bought that light blue stroller after we found out we were expecting a boy. When we lost the baby at 20 weeks, she stored the stroller in the garage, unable to give it away but unable to look at his stroller either. And my family had used her pain as entertainment. You are monsters, I said, my voice low but firm. Silence fell over the table. The children stopped laughing. Linda choked on her coffee. How dare you speak to us like that? Helen stood up, his face red with indignation. We opened our home to that unstable woman. We tolerated his outbursts, his crying, his refusal to contribute anything. We tolerated, Harold repeated, because you are our son. But our patience has limits. Kevin leaned forward, his expression serious for the first time. Thomas, you have to choose. Your family or that woman who is clearly having a nervous breakdown. Rachel is my family. No, Helen said coldly, Rachel is a mistake you can still correct. You're young, successful, attractive. You can find a woman who will actually work as a wife. Her words echoed in the silent kitchen. Even the children seemed to sense the tension. A woman who can give this family real grandchildren, Harold added. I looked at each of them. My mother, who had raised 3 children but apparently lost all compassion along the way. My father, who preached family values but didn't recognize her own daughter-in-law as family. My brother, who smiled as he watched the psychological destruction of an innocent woman. You're right about one thing, I said, getting up from the table. Everyone looked at me expectantly, thinking he had been convinced. I need to make a choice. Helen smiled triumphantly. I knew you would see reason, dear. The choice, I continued, is how I'm going to destroy you. Helen's expression changed instantly. Kevin dropped his tablet. Linda grabbed her husband's arm. Thomas, Harold stood up, her voice taking on a warning tone, watch your words. But I was already leaving the kitchen, climbing the stairs to gently wake her. She deserved to know that, for the first time in 6 months, she wouldn't have to face those monsters alone. Because while they thought he had broken my wife, he had actually just shown me exactly who he was beneath the facade of a respectable family. And people who psychologically tortured a grieving woman did not deserve the respect, protection, or loyalty I had blindly offered throughout my life. The plan I began to form that morning would change our lives forever. 3 days after that tense breakfast, I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of Rachel crying in the bathroom. I found her sitting on the cold bathroom floor, hugging her knees, rocking back and forth like a frightened child. Rachel, what happened? She lifted her tear-stained face, his eyes red and swollen. Thomas, her mother said I should take some pills to stop being a burden to everyone. My blood ran cold. What pills? She said they were special vitamins for women with mental health issues. But when I read the package insert, Rachel held out a box of medication. They're antipsychotics, Thomas. Her mother wants to medicate me without a prescription. I took the box, my hands shaking with rage. Olanzapine. A heavy medication used for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Helen had bought these drugs and tried to convince my depressed wife, his wife, to take them. She said that if I didn't take them, it would prove that I'm really crazy and that you should have me committed. I felt my vision blur with rage. Helen had crossed a line I didn't know existed. It was no longer just emotional cruelty. It was medical manipulation. How long has this been going on? Rachel hung her head in shame. 2 weeks. She gave me the pills every morning, saying you had asked her to take care of my mental health while you were traveling. I took Rachel back to bed, covered her carefully, and went downstairs to find Helen making coffee as if it were just another normal morning. Mom, I need to talk to you about the medication you've been giving Rachel. Helen didn't seem surprised. In fact, she smiled. Oh, did she tell him? Well, someone had to do something about her mental state, Thomas. You were always traveling. You gave her antipsychotics without a prescription. I got them from a doctor friend. He agreed that Rachel shows clear signs of mental disorder. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Which doctor friend? Dr. Peterson. You remember him from church. He said that women who lose multiple babies often develop delayed postpartum psychosis. Dr. Peterson. The same man who had lost his medical license 3 years ago for prescribing medication inappropriately. Helen knew this, but she had chosen to consult him anyway. Thomas, Helen continued, stirring sugar into her coffee, Rachel needs professional help. And if it's not his responsibility to provide it, I will. Professional help doesn't mean drugging someone without their consent. Sometimes the sickest people are the last to recognize they need treatment. At that moment, Kevin came downstairs, already dressed for work. What are you guys talking about so early? I'm explaining to Thomas about Rachel's treatment, Helen said casually. Kevin laughed. Oh, the pills. They worked well. She's been much calmer this past week. You two knew about this. Of course, Kevin said, pouring coffee. Linda even commented on how Rachel seemed less dramatic lately. We thought she was finally accepting reality. Linda appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas. Good morning, everyone. Are you talking about Rachel? She was so quiet yesterday. She barely spoke during dinner. She stopped feeling anything because you drugged her with antipsychotics. Harold walked into the kitchen at that moment, adjusting his tie. Thomas, her voice is too loud for this time of morning. Dad, they were medicating Rachel without a prescription. Harold paused, looked at Helen, then at me. And what's the problem? The problem? It's illegal. It's dangerous. It's cruel. Thomas, Harold approached, his voice taking on the authoritative tone I had known since childhood. Her wife was clearly in a mental crisis. Her mother made a responsible decision to protect this family. Protect this family from what? From having an unstable woman living under our roof. From having our grandchildren exposed to erratic behavior. From having neighbors commenting on the screaming and crying coming from our house. The grandchildren. Harold was talking about Kevin and Linda's children, who occasionally stayed at their grandparents' house. Besides, Harold continued, Rachel was clearly better with the treatment. More functional. More stable. She was sedated. She was controlled, Helen corrected. And for the first time in months, we were able to have peaceful family dinners. I looked at each of them. My entire family had conspired to drug her. And they saw it as a positive solution. Where did you get the medication? I already told you, Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson lost his license. Anything he prescribed is illegal. Kevin shrugged. Technicalities, Thomas. The important thing is that it worked. Worked. I exploded. Rachel spent 3 days vomiting last week. Did you know that antipsychotics can cause serious reactions in people who don't need them? She was probably faking being sick to get attention, Linda said. Like she always does. Just then my phone rang. It was Jake Morrison, my best friend since college, who now worked as a private investigator in Denver. Jake, I need you here. Now. Thomas? Is everything okay? No. I need you to come to my parents' house. And bring his recording equipment. Recording equipment? What's going on? Literally. Silence on the other end of the line. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and turned to my family, who had heard the entire conversation. Thomas, Harold said, her voice taking on a warning tone, be careful what you do next. Serious accusations have serious consequences. You're right, Dad. They do. Helen laughed nervously. Thomas, dear, you're being dramatic. Jake isn't a cop. He's just a private investigator. He can't do anything. You're right. He can't do anything. But he can document everything. Kevin sat up straight, looking concerned for the first time. Document what? The confession you just made. The fact that you conspired to illegally medicate a vulnerable person. The fact that you obtained controlled substances from an unlicensed physician. Linda gasped. Confession? We didn't confess to anything. We were just having a family conversation. Talking about crimes. Multiple federal crimes. Harold laughed, but his laughter sounded forced. Thomas, you're exaggerating. No prosecutor would waste time on this. Maybe not. But Jake knows prosecutors who care about elder abuse, improper medication, and conspiracy to commit assault. Rachel isn't elderly, Helen said. But she is vulnerable. And you took advantage of that. At that moment, I heard the doorbell ring. Jake had arrived. As I went to open the door, I heard urgent whispers behind me. My family was finally beginning to understand that they might have gone too far. Jake entered, carrying a leather briefcase and a digital recorder. He was tall and thin, with premature gray hair that gave him a distinguished appearance. Years as a private investigator had taught him to read situations quickly. Thomas, he said quietly, tell me exactly what's going on. I explained everything, Rachel's miscarriages, her depression, my family's emotional cruelty, and now the illegal medication. Jake listened quietly, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he nodded. This is serious, Thomas. Unauthorized medication of a vulnerable person can result in charges of aggravated assault. I know. And do you want to pursue this, His Honor? I thought of Rachel in the bathroom that morning, rocking like a traumatized child. I thought of the months of cruelty she had endured while I was traveling, trusting my family to take care of her. I want it to stop. Permanently. Jake nodded. Then we'll document everything. When we returned to the kitchen, the atmosphere had completely changed. My family was seated around the table, her expression serious for the first time. Harold stood up when Jake entered. Mr. Morrison, this is a private family matter. Jake smiled politely. Mr. Mitchell, private family matters don't involve illegal medication. Alleged illegal medication, Kevin corrected. Jake placed his recorder on the table. Well, then there should be no problem repeating what you said to Thomas earlier. Silence descended on the kitchen like a heavy fog. Helen was the first to speak, her voice no longer confident. We were just trying to help Rachel. Helping how, specifically? Giving her vitamins to improve her mood. Jake looked at me. I showed him the box of olanzapine. Mrs. Mitchell, are these vitamins? Helen looked at the box, then at Harold, then back at Jake. We thought she needed something stronger than vitamins. And you are qualified physicians to make that determination? We consulted Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson, who lost his medical license in 2021? Harold interjected. Jake, you're asking questions as if we were criminals. I'm asking questions as someone who documents evidence. If you're not criminals, the answers should be simple. Over the next hour, Jake methodically questioned each member of my family. With each question, her justifications melted away like cotton candy in the rain. When he was done, we had complete documentation of everything: the illegal procurement of drugs, the unauthorized administration, the family conspiracy, and the recorded confessions of her. Thomas, Jake said as we stepped out onto the porch, he could face serious charges. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I looked through the kitchen window, where my family huddled in a circle of concern they had never shown for Rachel. Jake, for months they psychologically tortured my wife. Now we've discovered they were illegally drugging her. If I don't act, they'll continue. And if you act, you'll destroy her family. No, Jake. They destroyed our family when he chose to treat Rachel as less than human. At that moment, I made the decision that would define the rest of our lives. Make the accusations. All of them. Jake nodded slowly. Then we need to prepare Rachel for what's coming. This is going to be a hurricane. As we went upstairs to talk to Rachel, I heard my mother start to cry in the kitchen. For the first time in months, the tears in the Mitchell household weren't Rachel's. And that was just the beginning of what was to come. Over the next 5 days, as Rachel slowly recovered from the effects of the illegal antipsychotics, I turned our temporary guest room at Jake's house into a veritable command center. Tables covered with documents, photographs of the medication, transcribed recordings, and 3 laptops running simultaneously. Jake watched as I meticulously organized each piece of evidence, my training as a technology consultant finally being useful for something other than corporate reports. Thomas, Jake said, pouring himself coffee for the third time that morning. "You're building a federal case here. Illegal medication, conspiracy, abuse of a vulnerable person. Her family could face years in prison." "Good," I replied, without looking up from the spreadsheets detailing every incident from the past 6 months. But prison wasn't enough. Prison was just punishment. I wanted complete justice, and justice meant that he understood exactly what he had done to Rachel. I called Marcus Chun, my contact at the Colorado Department of Health. Marcus and I had worked together on a medical records digitization project 2 years earlier. "Thomas, man, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, emailing him all the evidence Jake had collected. "My God," Marcus whispered after reviewing the documents. "This is serious, Thomas. Olanzapine administered without medical supervision to a person with depression can cause neuroleptic malignant syndrome. Her death could have been prevented." "I know. That's why I need you to conduct an official inspection of my parents' home. Today." "Today?" "Thomas, these things take time." "Marcus, I've documented everything. You'll find the medications, Dr. Peterson's forgeries, evidence of forced administration. It's a perfect case." Silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you want to destroy his family like this?" "He destroyed her first." While Marcus arranged for the emergency inspection, I called Sarah Kim, an investigative reporter for the Denver Post who covered family abuse cases. "Sarah, I have a story that will interest you." I sent her a summary of the case, omitting specific details but highlighting the most shocking elements: respectable family, illegal medication, abuse of a vulnerable person. "Thomas, this is dynamite. I can have a team there in 2 hours." "Not yet. I need to coordinate the timing. I'll let him know when." The plan was coming together layer by layer. It wasn't enough to expose what they had done. I wanted them to feel the same despair, the same helplessness that Rachel had felt for months. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Helen. "Thomas, dear, you need to come home. We're worried about you." "Worried?" "This obsession with Rachel isn't healthy. You're seeing problems where there aren't any." I took a deep breath. "Mom, you illegally drugged his wife. And now you're turning our genuine concern into something sinister." His ability to rewrite reality was impressive. "Thomas," Helen continued, her voice taking on a manipulative tone that I had known since childhood, "Rachel has always been unstable. You know that. The multiple miscarriages, the constant depression, the emotional outbursts. Maybe it's time to consider that she's not right for him. Suitable. You're a successful, intelligent man with a bright future. Why tie yourself to someone who only brings you trouble?" Every word of her was being recorded. Jake had installed an app on my phone that automatically documented all calls. "Mom, I have to go." "Thomas, wait. His father wants to talk to you." Harold took the call, her voice carrying judicial authority even in retirement. "Son, I know you're upset, but you need to think rationally. Jake Morrison is filling your head with exaggerated legal ideas. Inappropriate medication is, at most, a minor offense." "Dad. Let me finish. I've known prosecutors in this city for 30 years. They're not going to waste their time with dramatic charges against a respectable family for trying to help an unstable daughter-in-law." What Harold didn't know was that Marcus Chun had already initiated the official investigation. Within hours, inspectors from the Department of Health would be at his house with search warrants. "Besides," Harold continued, "you're putting Jake's career at risk. Private investigators who make false accusations against prominent families face professional consequences." Veiled threats. He was trying to intimidate me through Jake. "I understand, Dad." "Good. Then come home tonight. We can work this out as a family." I hung up and immediately called Marcus. "The inspection needs to happen within the next 2 hours. He's organizing to hide evidence." "We're already on our way, Thomas." At 5:30 p.m., I got the call I was waiting for. "Thomas, it's her," Helen whimpered, her voice completely different from the confident conversation earlier. "There are state inspectors here with search warrants. They're ransacking our house like we're criminals." "That's too bad." "What do you mean, too bad? They found the drugs." They're asking questions about Dr. Peterson. Maybe you should have thought about that before illegally drugging my wife. Thomas. Did you do this? Did you call the government on her own family? Kevin yelled in the background. He betrayed us. Our own sister. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm come over me. You betrayed Rachel first. And you betrayed me when I trusted you to take care of her. Thomas, please, Helen began to cry. We can work this out. Talking as a family. We don't need to involve outsiders. It's too late for that, Mom. Too late? Thomas, we're his family. Family doesn't torture family. Harold took the phone, her voice tense but still trying to sound authoritative. Thomas, you have no idea what you've just unleashed. State inspectors, investigations, negative publicity. This will affect us all. It will affect you. Rachel and I will be fine. You think you can just destroy decades of family reputation and walk away unscathed? I can. And I will. Thomas. I hung up. Jake was watching from the kitchen, a cup of coffee in his hands, his expression unreadable. How do you feel? I thought for a moment. Free. At 8 o'clock that night, I received a message from Sarah Kim. Health Department confirmed search and seizure of illegal drugs at Mitchell family residence. Story out early tomorrow. Need her statement. Not yet. I'll let you know when. Rachel came out of the bedroom at that moment, wearing one of my big sweaters, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. It was the first time in weeks that she seemed present. Thomas, I heard voices. Is everything okay? I hugged her, feeling his body still fragile but no longer trembling. Everything is more than okay, love. It's perfect. If you're following this journey of how I turned the worst moment of our lives into the beginning of our freedom, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the next 24 hours completely redefined the meaning of the word justice. Because while my family was finally beginning to understand that her actions had real consequences, I was organizing the final phase of a plan that would ensure they could never hurt anyone vulnerable again. Rachel slept peacefully that night for the first time in months. And I lay awake, not out of anxiety or fear, but out of the anticipated pleasure of watching a system of family manipulation finally crumble under the weight of her own cruelty. True revenge is not destroying his enemies. It is building a future where he can no longer cause harm, regardless of his intentions. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my phone woke me with the first call from Harold. Thomas, you need to stop this madness right now, her voice trembled, the judicial authority I had known since childhood completely absent. The inspectors have confiscated all the drugs. They have warrants to search the entire house. That's too bad. Too bad? Thomas, he found Dr. Peterson's fake prescriptions. They're asking questions about forced medication. I smiled, watching Rachel eat breakfast peacefully for the first time in months. She was still fragile, but her eyes had life in them again. Dad, maybe you should have thought about the consequences before illegally drugging my wife. At 7:15, the second call came from Kevin. Thomas, what the hell have you done? He yelled, her arrogance replaced by pure panic. My boss called me asking about criminal charges against our family. This could ruin my career at the law firm. Her career. I laughed. Kevin, her participation in the conspiracy to illegally medicate a vulnerable person is fully documented. Her career should be the least of her concerns. Conspiracy? Thomas, I'm serious, you need to fix this. I can't fix it. The Colorado State Department of Health now has jurisdiction over the case. Tense silence, then, Thomas, please. We're family. Family doesn't torture family, Kevin. At 8 in the morning, Helen called his number in tears. Thomas, honey, please come home. We can talk about this as a family. We don't need to involve strangers. Strangers like federal inspectors? Please, Thomas. I'm your mother. You can't do this to me. You did worse to Rachel. And she had no choice. But Thomas. Mom, you crossed a line that can't be erased. Rachel nearly died of hypothermia. You drugged her with antipsychotics for weeks. This isn't a family misunderstanding. At 9 in the morning, Jake arrived with a new folder of documents. Thomas, the investigation is expanding. The Department of Health has found evidence that Dr. Peterson was providing illegal medications to several families in the community. Several families. Apparently, your family was promoting his services. Harold used her reputation as a former judge to lend credibility. Rachel looked up from her cup of tea. Were they doing this to other people? It appears so. Wealthy families who wanted to control relatives with mental health issues. Rachel's stomach churned. Thomas, how many people have they harmed? Jake consulted his notes. The investigation has identified at least 8 cases in the last 2 years. All vulnerable people, elderly people with dementia, adults with depression, a veteran with PTSD, were affected. At that moment, I understood that our situation was not unique. It was part of a systematic pattern of abuse. At 10 in the morning, Harold called me again, but this time her voice was cold and calculating. Thomas, you have no idea what you've just set in motion. I've known people in this town for 50 years. Prosecutors, judges, politicians. They won't let you destroy respectable families with exaggerated accusations. Exaggerated accusations? Dad, you illegally drugged 8 vulnerable people. Allegedly. And even if it's true, do you think a prosecutor is going to waste time on this when he could be focusing on real crimes? They already have. Marcus Chun called her 15 minutes ago. The case has been transferred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Long silence. When Harold spoke again, his voice was different. Federal. Unauthorized medication across state lines. Dr. Peterson was importing drugs from Mexico. That's a federal crime. Thomas, you can't be his serious. Completely serious. And there's more. More. Sarah Kim from the Denver Post is publishing the story tomorrow. Prominent Denver family accused of operating illegal drug scheme. The phone was silent for so long that I thought Harold had hung up. Thomas, he finally whispered, you've destroyed our family. No, Dad. You did that when you chose to treat vulnerable people as disposable. At 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Linda, carrying their 2 young children, tears streaming down her face. Thomas, please, she begged. Kevin could lose his job. They could sue us. The children will suffer because of this. I looked at the children, innocent and confused, then at Linda. Linda, where was this concern for suffering when Rachel was freezing on the porch? That's different, Thomas. It was only 20 minutes. It wasn't 20 minutes. And you knew that. But the children, Thomas. Think of the children. I am thinking. I'm thinking about how many other children have been exposed to this family's toxic behavior. How many vulnerable people have been medicated without consent. At 12:30, Jake returned with news that completely changed the game. Thomas, you need to see this. The federal investigation found financial records. His family was being paid by wealthy families to manage problematic relatives. I felt my blood run cold. Paid. $5,000 a month. Per person. His family was operating an illegal medication scheme as a business. Rachel dropped her cup. They were making money by drugging her. Jake nodded gravely. And apparently, Rachel wasn't the only paid guest. There were 3 other people living in the house periodically. At that moment, it all made sense. My family's insistence that Rachel stay with him. His resistance when I suggested she seek professional help. The immediate medication without proper evaluation. He wasn't taking care of Rachel. He was being paid to chemically control her. Thomas, Jake continued, the FBI is taking over the case. This is no longer about inappropriate medication. It's about an organized scheme of abuse and fraud. My phone rang. It was Helen, but her voice was completely different, small, scared, desperate. Thomas, please, you need to help us. Federal agents are here with arrest warrants. Arrest warrants. For his father, Kevin, and me. Thomas, please tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I took a deep breath, looking at Rachel, who finally seemed to be processing the true extent of what she had endured. Mom, it wasn't a misunderstanding. You ran a criminal scheme that harmed vulnerable people. Thomas, I'm his mother. And Rachel is his wife. The difference is that she never hurt anyone. Please, Thomas. Don't let he take us away. For the first time in my adult life, I heard my mother truly pleading. Mom, you made that decision when you chose to turn human suffering into profit. I hung up the phone and turned to Rachel, who was looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Thomas, she whispered, you really did it. You stopped them. We did it, Rachel. Her courage in telling me the truth made it all possible. Jake put away his documents, smiling for the first time in days. Thomas, he's looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The scheme affected dozens of families. At that moment, my phone rang one last time. It was an unknown number. Mr. Mitchell? This is Agent Patricia Walsh from the FBI. We need his statement about her family's activities. Of course, Agent Walsh. When? This afternoon, if possible. We have substantial evidence, but his testimony will seal the case. As I spoke with the agent, I watched Rachel get up and walk to the window. For the first time in months, she was standing, looking toward the future instead of hiding from the present. The family that thought they could control anyone through manipulation and forced medication now faced federal justice. And Rachel, the woman they called useless and dramatic, would be the key witness who would ensure they could never hurt anyone again. What happened in the next few hours completely redefined the meaning of the word justice in our lives. 6 months later, I received a call from Agent Walsh. Thomas, the trial is over. His family has been convicted. Harold got 8 years, Helen 6, Kevin 5. The scheme affected 23 different families. 23 vulnerable people who suffered what Rachel suffered. And Dr. Peterson? 10 years. Permanent loss of medical license. I hung up and found Rachel in the kitchen of our new home, making pancakes. She was singing softly, something she hadn't done in years. Good news? She asked, smiling. The best. Rachel had completely transformed. Proper therapy, away from forced medication and psychological abuse, allowed her to flourish again. She returned to cooking, resumed her art, and for the first time in years, spoke about the future with hope. Thomas, I got an interesting call yesterday, she said, serving the pancakes. An organization that supports victims of family abuse wants me to be the spokesperson for their national campaign. I smiled. Rachel had found her purpose, to use her experience to protect others who were vulnerable. Last week, I visited Helen in prison. She looked small, fragile, completely different from the domineering matriarch I had known. Thomas, she whispered, we're still family. No, Mom. Family protects. You prayed. I left without looking back. Today, Rachel and I run a foundation that helps victims of family abuse. We turned our pain into purpose, our tragedy into hope for others. The last I heard from my family, Kevin had lost his license to practice law. Harold was facing civil lawsuits from all the families affected. Helen developed severe depression in prison. The irony did not escape me. They finally understood what it meant to be vulnerable in a system that did not protect them. Rachel still has occasional nightmares, but now she has a voice, she has choice, she has dignity. She has become stronger than I ever thought possible. If this story of how I protected my wife from monsters disguised as family has touched his channel, we share stories of people who found strength in adversity. Because in the end, true revenge wasn't destroying those who hurt me. It was building a life where they could never cause harm again. Sometimes protecting those we love means confronting those we've always loved. And that choice, as painful as it may be, defines who we truly are.